I'll call to order Public Hospital District Number 2 special board meeting for October 13th. We are now in session. Before we get started, I certainly want to thank the commissioners and all the staff of Verdant for giving up an evening away from their families to help us get through and the budgetary process. So thank you all for that. And if you didn't know, this meeting is being recorded. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa and staff to run us through the presentation.
Great. Are we sharing slides? Or am I sharing? Debbie, what's the plan? Are you sharing slides or am I? Tammy's sharing. Okay. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Tammy.
Sure. Is that clear? I can't see what you see, so.
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay.
Great. Good evening, commissioners, team members, and welcome guests as well. This evening, we'll be going over our hearing, and I'd like to advance to the next slide. So this slide is representing the requirement we have by state law for a preparation of a proposed budget to present to the board for financial transactions for 2022 and to file the budget in the records of the commission on or before the first day of November. So this is our first review, followed by the October 27th board meeting, where there will be a final approval of the budget. A recap and reminder for everyone. The mission of Verdant is to improve the health and well-being of our whole community. And our vision is to be a sustaining public resource, improving the health and well-being of South Snohomish County, collaboratively and creatively working to meet the needs of our whole community. Here's a recap of our budget timeline as well. And so here you see the preparations that have gone already taken place starting in August. I'd like to thank Tammy Quaiser and team members. Tammy worked very closely with each team member and program area to make sure that we finalize the budget and we are being efficient stewards of our resources. On September 13th, the budget was presented to Finance Committee. We also did a budget recap at the September 18th Board Strategic Planning Retreat. And we had public notices posted on September 29th and October 6th. Today, or excuse me, this evening, we have our public hearing, followed by any revisions that are recommended by board members, and then the final approval on October 27th for posting by November 1st. Here are the organizational goals. This is a recap of our goals related to the budget. To increase community engagement and collaboration, especially on new grant opportunities to provide ongoing support for addressing the issues that have been created by the pandemic, focusing on community needs data and Verdant priority areas. Our goal is to improve and maintain the structural integrity of all Verdant properties. We'd like to continue the Building Healthy Communities Fund, and we'll be addressing that this evening. And to maintain a financial reserve and monitor investments. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Tammy.
Hi. So here's one of the first graphs I'm going to show you. I have a couple charts to show you today. This is our revenue expense trends from 2012 up into what we have budgeted for 2022. We've shown a consistent increase in expenses, and as you can tell, that's in line with the program expenses, whereas our operational expenses have been pretty flat. So Verdant has done a really good job of keeping their expenses in control and spending any of the additional revenue on grants and program funding. As you'll see later on in the presentation, you can tell there's a little bit of a dip this year as we brought down our program budget. And now our revenue. So here's the assumptions we went off for revenue. Swedish Edmunds, that's paid based upon existing contract. That goes up every September, so it's pretty much locked in. Kruger Clinic, Suite 270 still remains unoccupied. We've done a lot of reconciliations. Greg at Coast is working on it to make sure we have everything in line there. So the revenue is based on his reconciliation of the Kruger Clinic revenue for the year. Also, the continued minimal programming and conference fees due to COVID-19. We did bump those up a little bit this year, hoping that there's going to be some more activity this year as things kind of get a little more normalized, at least than last year. The levy, it's standard, a 1% annual increase year after year. That's budgeted in. And our investment income was a little tricky this year. So we played it kind of safe, and this is where I am with this. We're projecting right now for investment income to be at 385K. So I budgeted 300. I was trying to be conservative there because the unrealized gain, it's projecting out to be a loss of about 420. So I budgeted that as at a flat zero. It's really unpredictable right now. I'm hoping for it to go up, but that's where I felt safe budget wise.
Tammy, before you
Yeah.
go on, go back. So when does the board need to take action on increasing the annual levy by 1%?
I have until November 30th, so I'll be working on that document this next week.
Okay.
We just received that document this week from the county, Bob.
Okay, so here's our revenue by source. You can see, I really like these graphs because they really put a picture here. You can see where the revenue's gone down. We had 2 really strong years in our investment account, and it's very challenging this year, and hopefully it'll start to pick up again next year. We're not budgeted for any revenue program, Verdant program revenue this next year. And our other properties, that was primarily, there's a small amount for the ground lease, but that's primarily Value Village, which we're no longer budgeting for. And here's a breakdown of revenue by source. I like to call these my Pac-Man charts. So the hospital lease is our primary form of revenue. Speaking to the choir here, though, you all know that. So this breaks it out by our budgeted property tax levy expectation of 2.5, and the ground lease, which is a flat. It's there's no increases year over year on that. It's just a flat amount. Non-operating income, and our Kruger Clinic lease. So that's kind of breakdown of where our monies are coming from. Then our expenses. I'm gonna let Lisa take over for the assumptions, and then I'll be back.
Yes, and you're going to see these twice. I have an overview, and then when we get into the program grants, Zoe will give you more detailed information as well. So overall, based on the strategic planning retreat, what we received from commissioners as guidance, we're planning for 9.5 million in program grants. We've reduced the superintendent's discretionary fund to 100,000. The Building Healthy Communities grants, we have earmarked 108,000 in case there is a specific project or something the commissioners want to fund. The co-funding 100,000 that has been a separate line item has now been rolled into the program grants. And so the total program expenses will be under 10.5 million.
So how do we land at 108, not 110 or 100? Like, why? It just seems like an odd number if it's an assumption.
It's reconciliation of expenses and revenue. I'll turn it over to Tammy.
Yeah. So you're talking about the Building Healthy Communities grant?
Yeah.
We actually have a payout due that's already on schedule, and I'll show you that later in another slide in more detail. And that one is 107, I think 107.750, 107,750.
Makes sense.
that's what that is. Well, I'll jump right into this. So expenses by department. Program expense, that's the bulk of the money.
Oh, yeah. I got a question.
Yes,
Could you go back to the other slide, please?
sure.
Is $100,000 for the superintendent's discretionary fund enough, you think? I'm not thinking about the money per se, but how getting the money out quickly to the people for the COVID funding. So people are comfortable with that?
No, it basically, our average grant award is right around 25,000-30,000. So that's, up to 4 grants for the whole year.
Right.
And we're still in a pandemic and we don't know when it's going to subside. So there is concern about that number.
Okay. Thank you.
And hey, Tammy,
Yes,
so what was our total operational revenue? Did I miss, was that on a previous slide? I missed that, did I? So, okay,
14.14.
14.4, okay.
Jim, we have talked at program and finance about figuring out how to funnel some of the programs or some of the grantees that were made through the superintendent's fund into a more formal process. Like, Gene Kim is a really good example. There are other smaller grants that are impacted.
It's not the money, because would imagine the money will come from one source or another. It's more a matter of being speedy, quick turnaround, pivoting when the need is there for COVID. That's my main concern.
And when I do my little overview, Jim, I also, in this total of the program grants, that includes $500,000 specific for COVID that we're proposing to go through a monthly approval process rather than the quarterly traditional grant. So it would be more rapid than our quarterly process, but would kind of respond to the desire to have more board kind of review and approval. So we're trying to kind of shoehorn that into that total amount. And I'll talk through that too.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's.
We need some clarity.
Okay.
We need some clarity from the commissioners because at the board retreat, it was clear that the direction was to reduce to 100,000. And so we are proposing, if possible, that there's a consideration of a greater amount.
Well, I kind of took, when I looked through this stuff earlier, that there was a separate COVID piece that what Zoe was talking about for the 500,000.
Yeah,
That was separate from the 100,000 for the
you're right.
Yes.
Excuse me.
superintendent's discretionary.
Right. And when we get a little bit further along, Zoe's going to go into that in a lot more detail. But that's kind of our idea is like she said, 500 of that specifically for COVID and hopefully in a monthly approval process rather than the quarterlies to expedite those funds getting out.
So at a high level, Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, but our budget's a wash. We have nothing going into reserves right now.
Correct.
Well, that's okay. That's not okay. All right.
So this is a comparison of Verdant expenses. This takes away from the other properties and comparing what's projected to end of 21 and what we budgeted for 22. There's an increase in salaries of 80,000. Their professional services has gone down considerably. Part of that was consulting fees that have gone down. Purchase services is going up slightly, but that's pretty much a wash at 7,000. Supplies, again, that's pretty minimal of an increase. There's a lot of flat budgeting this year. Repairs and maintenance, that has gone up a bit. We do see some repairs that need to be done, especially if we don't get the capital monies to do some of the big projects that we have in plan, then there'll be some repairs that need to be done. Utilities have gone down a bit. And just other operating expenses in general has gone up. Some of that is due to hopefully getting out there and doing more things that we weren't able to do in the last year with trainings and stuff. So that's a big oversight on just the Verdant side. That's not the other properties. The projected compared to what is budgeted for next year. So trimming down a little bit. Any questions on that? Okay. So I am going to hand this over to Zoe at this point.
Thank you. So this is looking at internal programs as well as the grant expenses. So I'll be really covering the grant expense pieces. If Tammy, can you move to the next slide? So this is looking at the projection committed for by priority area. So trying to sort through where we have and currently committed funds by priority area, as well as what fund availability we have. So uncommitted based on the assumed budget. Bob, you're thinking about the reserve too and investments, because we didn't have a Q4 2020 funding process. We didn't have Q1 new contracts. We will be fairly significantly under budget, close to, I think we'll probably like $850,000 under budget in 2020 for these multi-year program grants. So I think there may be some ways to consider also alternative fund sources, but of course we will fit to whatever the approved amounts are. And so this is just looking at priority area investments in terms of commitments to date. Next slide. Based on the conversations at the retreat, the program budget assumptions are based on aligning with kind of specific or increased focus on access to healthcare, so medical, dental, behavioral health, food security, and housing stability. So we would maintain the other priority areas that have previously been identified of childhood obesity, supporting seniors, and other education and prevention, but they would not be necessarily the areas of focus for investment or grant making this year. Here we're looking through the program budget assumptions. Again, this is the final payment of $107,750 for the 2018 approved Building Healthy Communities Fund. This is slated for July payment to the City of Edmonds. That will finalize all of those contracts. We did put here the $100,000 superintendent's discretionary funds and $500,000 COVID-19 response dollars, again, with moving towards a monthly board approval process. And this puts $9 million in the annual program grants. We have approximately $4.9 million already committed. Next slide. This is another look by year at the Building Healthy Communities payments. So we can look over this final pending year of 2022 to finalize all approved funds. This is going to be, this is a lot of information, and I'm happy to go over this in trends. The next slides are going to show our potential grant renewals. And what you'll see here is the program, the agency, their current award, the contract expiration date. And I also added this column that shows the year of the contract expiring. Because we moved to annual contracts, starting with our process this year, for many folks, you'll see that this is their first year of funding they're ending, that we had anticipated having them renew budget and outcomes for their second year. We do have a mix of some folks who are coming to the end of their 3-year term. So this would be a truly brand new renewal process of the complete application process. If we go through here, because of that moving towards annual contracts, there's going to be a lot more information here. So if we move through the slides, this is by quarter. So this would be determining when they would be applying for their renewal. And then when we get to our fourth slide here, this is where we show the data. If we approved all of our renewals at the current rate that they're funded, so at 100% of the current annual award amount. I am working on some forecasting of different scenarios that I will be bringing to program committee that looks at administrative caps, direct versus indirect cost caps, looking at the kind of percent funded that we have historically been doing based on applied amount versus approved amount that we can kind of start looking at for some of that forecasting. Because obviously we can't approve all of these at this current amount if in our budget, and or we would not have the ability to fund any new programming if we did. So we'll have several different kind of ways that we can look through that. And of course, I look forward to hearing feedback from Kariana and Dina and others about other kind of scenarios that would be interesting to look at to see what that impact would be on this bottom line number.
Committed because of multi-year contracts, correct?
What was that? Sorry.
Sorry, can you clarify that 6 million, that roughly $6 million potential that we could, fund is in addition to what we have already committed?
That's correct.
Yes. So do you have a slide of what that brings us to?
That would bring us to over 12, it's about $12 million. And we have, don't even have 9, right? We have 9 million here. So I've gone through several different scenarios of looking at each of the contract budgets and how there are ways we could address that kind of unilaterally and or like we have done with this past kind of quarters around, for our longer term programs that we want to sunset, kind of what we want that process to look like, and coming up with a policy for kind of winding down some of our longer term grants if we feel like there may be a more strategic use for those funds given the changing needs due to COVID. I think it is interesting looking through the number that are year 1 expiring, right, where we did just the 1-year contract versus those that are at the end of like year 3. We have a couple that are at year 4 because we did a 1-year extension at the end of last year because we weren't going to have a Q4 funding process, and we didn't want people to lapse without kind of a competitive process to participate in.
Right.
So we'll see, but I do think there's going to be some interesting conversations around kind of the philosophy and approach we want to take of balancing some of those longer term relationships versus some of the newer community work that's emerging given the budget.
Yeah, these are big questions for us to face now with not enough revenue to cover our in theory, the requests.
Right.
I wouldn't say in theory.
Assuming they all,
Yeah.
put in a renewal request.
And assuming it's flat, right? What we've seen obviously
Yes.
is that it is an increase each time we get the renewal as well. So I'm also trying to think through, and Kariana and Dina, you'll get to see one of my crazy spreadsheets. Like, what if we had like a cost of living adjustment only increase parameters? Like, what would that look like? And what if we did, right? So I think we can think through, how the scalpel versus the whatever the axe, whatever that is, in terms of how nuanced do we want to be by application versus coming up with some criteria we would broadly apply based on current budgets that could have a pretty significant overall impact based on what we're currently funding.
Well, and then I think it also, we have taken into consideration that they're taking inflation that they're talking about right now, how that is going to play out over this next year, and then what that means in terms of where we need to cut. So.
Absolutely. I'm looking at, Dina, it's a great point. So I was looking at just the cost of inflation, and I saw Social Security just went in at a 5.9% inflation index. And so I was looking at like year 1, right? And a lot of that has happened in the last year. So the people who are expiring at year 3 may not be in that different of a boat than people who are expiring at year 1. So 2 scenarios, one at 5%, but only on those direct personnel salary costs. So not inflating indirect or administrative costs, of looking at 5% and at an 8%, and what that kind of does to the overall, if we're looking just at the direct personnel salary benefits and direct kind of
Right.
necessary program expenses.
Yeah, for Social Security, they said it was going to be bumped up 5.9% for the cost of living, but Medicare Part B is going up 6.7%. So you have to take into consideration that's the medical part.
Yep.
And so there's a pretty hefty jump there.
Yes. So I do think it's the exact right conversation to think through how we want to apply some of those realities of just doing the same work has gotten more expensive because of workforce and inflation, and also historically we have funded a lot of kind of those indirect costs. And so I think there are a variety of ways you know, we could look at requests or budgets and or something totally different, right? So I look, I think having our targets also of, you know, of 9 million allows us to make those decisions within the kind of framework of what we have available kind of to spend, right, by quarter. And we can prorate that out. And you'll see I do that for 2023 as well, because each subsequent quarter's decision will then start impacting the 2023 budget as well. But that's a
Looking
lot of,
forward to it.
that's a lot of data. Yeah, so I'm happy to hand it back over now to Lisa, I think, to talk about the internal programming.
So the other piece that we want to make sure the commissioners understand is we did budget for continuation of all of our internal Verdant programs. So that includes nutrition, classes, behavioral health, multicultural program, all the education and health screenings, provider trainings, and continuing medical education, as well as chart leadership, a new project we're doing, as well as the case management our social worker Nancy Budd does as well. And then that we are continuing an ongoing evaluation of internal programs and contracted services to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible. We are looking at increased emphasis on provider education and referrals, tying to behavioral health. As you're all aware, burnout among behavioral health providers is at an all-time high, as well as their attrition from the industry. And so Nancy has done an excellent job of planning some great webinars with nationally recognized speakers for our providers to access resources. There's also increased number of ongoing programs with specific outcomes. We're tracking participation rates in our classes and all of our workshops as well. How many people we're serving in district versus out of district, and how we can increase our outreach to residents of the district to access services in a virtual format. The virtual Latinas Women's Conference is something we're looking at for 2022, as well as a different approach for us, and that is collaborations and partnerships. Because we offer a conference or an event, does Verdant necessarily have to pay for the full bill? Can we partner with other organizations to better leverage our funds that we have and to be more efficient and effective? And now I believe I'm turning it over to Tammy.
Yeah, here's kind of a great big high level overview of our projection versus the budget. So our projection for 21 for revenue, we're looking at 11.7. We budgeted for 11.5, which is a reduction of 167,000. Our programs, we're looking at projected actual payout of 11.2, and we're budgeting for 10.4. That's a reduction of 818,000. Our operating expenses are almost flat, which there's been some changes, but some ups and downs. So we went from 2.5 to 2.6. And depreciation, that's pretty much set at where it's at. It's going down a bit. Maintenance and operations, the levy, that's going up, it's 1%, and other non-operating revenue. We actually had non-operating expenses that knocked that into negative this year, and next year we have a budgeted revenue of 305 there. So that's just kind of a super high overview of the detail you all have been able to see. If you have questions on this, I'm going to turn it back to Lisa.
Thank you. So now we'd like to talk about challenges, changes, and unknowns. There is the capital needs for the career clinic refresh of up to $3 million. And we also have a light remodel of the Verdant Community Wellness Center to make space for more efficient use of space for staff. This would be contingent, obviously, upon, as we've discussed, the sale of Value Village. There's the continued impacts of COVID-19 and whether there is another variant or prolongation of the pandemic. The return on investments and unrealized gains or losses continue to be a factor that we are monitoring and took into consideration. There is the financial impact of public records requests. If in fact we receive one that is extensive. And then as we've had in the past, there is the potential for litigation, even if it is not directly against Verdant, if somehow Verdant becomes involved and has to pursue legal representation. And then there are always state or federal policy changes that we must take into consideration that may evolve. And then, so where we're at right now is we're looking at a strong financial position overall. The decrease in operating revenue is about 3.7%. I think Tammy did a great job of articulating, especially with our investments, really crept up over the last several years, and then 21 was not similar in performance. So we saw a decrease. Expenses are stable. Our program budget does include a 7.5% decrease from what was projected for 21. And then we are fortunate that we have had 11 years of clean financial audits. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Hold on, I gotta get it up, this special thing. Okay. The next item is a public hearing on the proposed 2022 budget. At this time, I would like to open this hearing. The purpose of this hearing is to listen to people who have comments regarding the proposed budget. This is the time for presentation of testimony. No debate is allowed. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. An official recording of what is said is being made. Please come forward and give us your name and an address for the record. Do we have anyone from the public? In the waiting room? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? 3 times? At this time, the hearing is closed.
Now we move towards commissioner discussion of the budget.
Can I make a comment? For some reason, I thought it was on one of the slides and we had talked about it and it wasn't then. I want to make sure you are aware that in the budget, there's, in addition to the $107,000 that's already committed to building healthy communities, we proposed an additional 310 there. So that's in there as well. I want to make sure you guys were aware of that because for some reason that wasn't as clear in my presentation.
Yeah, can you say that again, Tammy?
Yeah, what's that allocated for?
It's not allocated.
It's not allocated, which is why we put it there because the discussions haven't happened yet. Are we going to do something next year? Are there any proposals for doing something next year? So there is that 310,000 that's sitting there that if we want to do something, that's great. And if not, we can move it somewhere else if necessary.
So that there's that in addition to what we have to pay out, that final payout for the city of Edmonds, correct? I want to make sure that
Correct.
commissioners understand. So it'd be a total of 500,000. So
There's a total in there right now, 417,750. 107 is already committed and 310 is what we were proposing that is available.
okay. So that could be, depending on what the commissioners prefer, that could be funding that goes into the reserve if there's no interest in funding building healthy communities. So that is one option for the commissioners to consider.
But right now, if I understand this, there's $310,000 in there for building healthy communities, which generally is big, large capital endeavors. And
Right, but I
Yes.
think we were talking about, besides the big capital pieces, they're the ones like the refrigerators and the smaller capital things that have come up, but we have put off because we said it had to be under the building healthy, it had to be under the capital budget. So I think I think that was the conversation. Wasn't that we were gonna do a big capital spend, but that did we need to have money for like smaller capital expenses, like say a refrigerator or something like that?
We do have a community partner who has already approached us about asking if we were going to have another Building Healthy Communities Fund because they need to update their commercial food prep kitchen. And so this is food that they prepare and meals for seniors, asking if we're going to have another. So that would be an example of a smaller capital project. Now, as I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, these projects have been multi-year. So there would be financial implications for future years. And so what we did was just allocate the 310,000, excuse me, for 22 discreetly. If that's a placeholder for commissioners.
Well, I do like having that capital available for one-time small items for some of our partners to keep them operational. I'm not comfortable with a budget neutral budget. So, I mean, if I was looking at this, I would say we need to take some out of the program budget. In terms of looking back at Howard's reserve analysis, we're not even close at this point in time, and we need to continue to move forward. We're not even at 60 days, and if we're talking about 90 days, we're talking close to almost 90 million in reserves. So I think we need to make a very conscious decision on what our intent is if we are going to move in that direction to continue to build our reserves. I don't see our bond portfolio increasing significantly over the next couple of years if we have inflation, so we can't really count on that. So, you know, as painful it is, I think we need to take some money out of the program budget. I mean, I don't see where else it's going to come from, but that's just my 2 cents.
And we do have both Howard and Brad coming to the October 27th board meeting to discuss the reserve and potential options for what that investment portfolio would look like, how much needs to be cash and how much needs to be other assets that could be liquidated if needed.
And you mean, when you say other assets, you're talking like property or something that's non-liquid, AKA property.
Right.
Yeah.
With the understanding that given the operations and the current lease, we would have typically at least a year's notice. So, and so then in that scenario, how much do we need to have? The question is, how much do we need to have in cash versus other assets that we would liquidate if needed? Because if we have that much notice, could we then secure another operator for the hospital?
So,
But either way, we're short in capital, whether you put it in bonds or you split the bonds.
Sure.
So,
No, and I'm not just, I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. I'm just saying that that's what he's going to come and give you potential
Mhm.
pie charts of what those
So-
options could look like.
so the question I have though is if they're coming on the board meeting, but we also have to okay the budget at that same meeting. So are they gonna have that conversation with us before we okay the budget? I would hope.
Good question.
Well,
it doesn't really affect our budget though, Dina. We still need to, but how we allocate our reserves, that's a downstream question. What we need to do is just approve our 2022 operating budget. And that's where they can provide guidance. But it's not going to affect our decision on total revenue versus total expense.
Well, but if you're saying that we're going to cut program monies in the budget, isn't that part of the conversation here?
Well, we're still not even close to the reserves that we would need to be at. So that's the decision. that needs
Okay,
to be
but I'm
made.
just wondering, are we going to have that, when we set up the meeting for our board meeting, can we have that conversation with them before we do whatever we're going to do with the budget? I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure.
We can set up if you would like to have it sooner, I can check their availability and schedule something for next week. and move it up a week?
Well, either that or they could just do it earlier in the meeting before we have to actually have a vote on the budget, so we can have that conversation.
That's
So,
true.
Howard has a commitment on that day, so I just need to let you know, we could look at another day. The soonest he's available that day is 9 a.m. So we could move the start of the board meeting, or we could move to another meeting day.
Okay, well, whatever seems to work out. I
Okay,
just would want to have that conversation before we actually okay a budget. I mean, we can always amend the budget at a later date, but it's better to have the information ahead of time.
So I think we need to come back to, again, top line revenue and expense. Are we comfortable with a neutral budget? Do we want to have more going into reserves?
What I hear you, Dina, saying is maybe that information will help you answer that question.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah. I would agree that I would appreciate their input on this. On the how long a projection, how long would it take us to get to this reserve, right? Like, it's going to be years, but is that the number that we need to land on? And here's the other thing that we have talked about in the past, that with Brad and AWPD, is we are constrained, obviously, in how we invest our monies in bonds. I mean, like, the market has made 15 to 20% this last couple of years. So if we're not going to grow our reserve or our revenue at a pace that's commensurate, right, with right now anyway, the cost of living and expenses. So I know we're in an extraordinary time, but we have talked about we are under the same constraints that other public hospital districts are or other public entities in investing. But are we looking out for the best interest of our community if we continue to have this constraint? And I know this takes a legislative conversation. We've gone down this road, but I do think we should bring it back up and talk with Brad. I don't know that we got a lot of effort before from AWPD on this. There are other organizations in different states that have done different things around this, and I'm not talking about being wild and risky, but I think there's other ways to have our money, if we had different constraints and less, to invest it in a fiscally responsible way that would get us more than the small percentage now. So.
Hey, Jim, do you have any comments? You've been quiet.
I was thinking about the reserves, and I'm thinking about it as a self-funded insurance policy. And then it occurred to me, are there insurance policies available for this sort of breach of contract that we could investigate? And even if I was thinking, even if you were paying, $1 million a year for a premium, that would, for a 20-year contract, that would still free up money, theoretically anyway. So have we ever looked into that? It kind of a Lloyd's of London kind of insurance policy for breach of contract for our contract with Swedish?
Well, I've been here for a long time, and I can tell you the answer to that is easy. No,
Yeah. I was gonna say
never even thought of it.
Okay, it's kind of a wild thought, but I don't know how to proceed, but it struck me as it might be something worth investigating, at least getting some sense if it's possible even.
Sure. So I guess I'll chime in now.
Yeah, welcome to the meeting, Fred.
Thank you very much. At a meta level, I am comfortable with a budget, a neutral budget. I'm comfortable with that. I think it's the prudent thing for us to do at this time. When we first started this organization, I think we had, Dina, we can refresh my memory. I think we had like 30 million in reserve, maybe 32.
Yep.
And we're sitting here now, what, 10 years later, and we're at 55.
Yeah,
So if we do that, if we duplicate that again in 10 years, we'll be short. So yeah, it's a situation where I think we have to keep in mind the risk of the event happening. But in terms of like the operational budget that we're dealing with to get us through the next year, I think that this is a very good budget. I'd like to congratulate the staff for pulling it together. There's a lot of detail in there that, you know, push comes to shove. I think I could support it. That's all.
Any other comments or feedback from the commissioners or at
We
time
have-
for the agenda?
We have, we also have the questions, if there are any specific items. We did send you a file with the budget broken down by line item for your review as well, so that you could see where we are affirming your direction for the changes that you wanted to be reflected. So please let us know if we missed anything or if there's anything you have questions about.
well, I guess the main things are people comfortable? Are the commissioners comfortable with the 500,000 for COVID 1 month? Because that's a new one that we're adding in. And of course, the capital, putting that capital piece in for small capital projects. To me, those are two new pieces that we've added in there. That and the other piece is that I was unclear about how the priority areas are being put together. I don't see how we can just cut out the seniors.
I think that's still a work in progress, Dina. I think what we were just clarifying was which ones may be a higher priority.
Okay, because I
for seniors.
wasn't sure how that was, because
Right.
the first three, and then it was like, well, we're not really gonna do the last three, but I'm not clear that we can just do that.
No,
quite
I
like
think,
that, but
Oh, sorry.
I think
No, there's
it's a, I don't think our goal is to eliminate. Our goal was to prioritize based on the direction and feedback that we received at the retreat. And Zoe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say most of the work that we do that is earmarked as specifically seniors is also earmarked as one of the others. And so I think,
right, that's what I was wondering.
yeah, I don't think there are any for the seniors that aren't also one of those top three. So I think that was how we walked through, right? If we're not removing anything, but as I'm working with applicants or people are interested, right? We do say select all that apply. And I can't think of anyone that has selected only supporting seniors. Typically they have multiple and it's around healthcare or food or housing. So I think we can, that is my assumption based on also going through and kind of looking at where everybody is with their primary priority area and where I could see them also being kind of
So
bucketed.
looking at the program piece, there were two that obviously kind of jump out. One is Move 60, which is at a very high amount. And then the other is homage. One is 800 and some thousand and one is 600 and some thousand. Am I correct? So those are the two biggest programs that we have on the list, right?
True, it's true.
The
Can
Center
you
for
go back
Health.
and show some of these graphs or these, because we're just looking at this
Sure.
question,
Yeah. We can go back. Tammy, can you go back and look at those? I do want to point out one point of clarification, Dina. In the 2021 budget, we continued what the commissioners had directed in 2020, and that was 1 million for superintendent's discretionary. That was the
Okay.
total. So what we've
Mhm.
done for 2022 is we've reduced superintendent's discretionary fund to 100,000.
Right,
We have set aside 500,000. So the difference is basically $400,000 less total. So we have
Right.
500 for COVID that will go monthly through program committee. And then 100,000 for the year for superintendent's discretionary for anything evolving or identified as urgent that needs a rapid response.
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
yeah.
I just want to make sure that that's clear for you.
And
Because usually what we did with superintendent's discretionary prior to this, it was used just for like one-time events or one-time, it
Right.
wasn't an emergency fund as such.
right.
Go ahead, Cariana.
So,
Oh, I can take it down. I just, sorry. I wanted to see the graph, the chart. Yeah.
And
You
so
wanna see-
these are already funded. Zoe, can you talk through one more time? I know you already covered this, but can you give a recap, please?
Yeah, so this is looking at already committed. So for, and by priority area. So the biggest purple Pac-Man, as Tammy would say, is our available, meaning it has not been committed. The piece that's new this year is that we have with 1-year contracts, right? There are a lot of grants that in previous years would have been approved for all 3 years of a contract. So there would have been committed funds across multiple years. That did not happen this year as we're doing our annual budget. So that's why you'll see this available amount is higher than it has been in previous years, but that does not reflect the increase in renewals that will need to occur because of the 1-year contracts. So in the next TK, if you would move forward to the next. So here's that in my little parentheses there, Dina, my like many current applicants in these areas are also represented in the above categories. I think there will be few who do not fit into those 3 bullets. It was a good call out though. And TK, the next piece I want to get to our renewals slides here. Can you do one more? One more. Yeah, thank you. So here, and I pulled this out of a spreadsheet that has more columns that's looking at scenarios. But I think looking through kind of some of these longer term ones, we do have several that are up for renewal that will be applying in November that are at the end of a 3-year term. So I do think there's opportunity there. Dina, you mentioned homage, right? We have the 628,000 annual contract for them. I think there are, right, so looking at this in a lot of different ways is to look in different quarters where last year or this year, we started funding these 1-year applications with contracts effective April 1st. So if you go to the next slide, Tammy, you'll see increasingly these expirations are ending the first year of their contract. So the year-end contracts are trending towards being the older contracts that were calendar year based, not always, but how it's playing out this year, where we'll see in the middle of the year, more and more of our approvals from this quarterly process this year coming up for renewal.
Like, I just want to go back. Can you go back? That's great. To the March ones. So for instance, I'm just glancing at this specific treatment alternatives.
Mhm.
You know, I understand why we did that. Great program. Does it fit? This is a question just a rhetorical question to us all.
Mhm.
As we look at our programs and our, budget and funding, does that fit into those priorities that we have sort of identified for next year, right? Now.
I can say no.
I would say no, but
So,
someone's got to say and do the
No.
hard thing here this next year. And I'm looking at this right now without having any review of any grant information, anything at all. It does not. So that, Dina, is what we're going to have to go through and talk about.
right. And I would say like in a program like that, where there's a big question for us, it seems like it would make sense to go to them earlier
Mhm.
and have that conversation to see if we can help them find an alternate form or where we could step down what we're adding in something, have those conversations earlier instead of like right when they're trying to apply. That's what my concern
Yeah.
is that like all of these programs where we have we've committed some pieces, we need to have conversations ahead of time. And we need to figure out if there's some kind of help we can give them so that we're not just like burning them at the last minute. That's kind of my sense of,
And
because I
Dina,
agree,
that's,
that one might be one that we need to talk to them. Is there an alternative source of funding for that?
Totally agree.
Jim had a comment. Jim had his hand up.
It might be helpful at some point along the way to see this list by funding amount, so that the higher funding amounts are at the top, rather than doing it by contract expiration date. In other words, same data, just organized differently. That might be helpful for me in
Yeah.
formulating thoughts.
wanted to address what Dina said as well, because I think it's important. And I know it has been a scramble with the like interview pieces. So I've proposed dates for next year, which will allow us to have a broader time frame for program committee, which will allow an additional month in the review stage so that we can do the interviews earlier on and get kind of the better questions, so to speak, as we go through that review process, because that was a good learning from this year of just the sequencing of things and where it would be helpful to have more time to do things like being proactive with renewals, as well as getting to know newer applicants. So I have that kind of sketched out, and Jennifer and I were looking through kind of how it would all fit together with the website and other things of how it would kind of pace out over the year, but give us a little bit more breathing room and continue to be the quarter April, July, October, and January contract start dates.
There's another piece that the program committee is working on that we haven't brought to the full board yet, that we as a team have been working on. And that is how do we handle non-renewal and the transition funding, and how does that process occur for notification? You know, I'll use Move 60 as an example. We have numerous faculty positions that are paid out of Move 60. And that's a 1-year contract the district makes.
Yep.
So, and that's a multi-year contract. That's huge. And so we have to we need to give advance notice. We need to be clear in our communications if we're not renewing, because of the implications for the organization. And so that's the other piece that we're going to be bringing is, you know, what does that process look like? How much time in advance do we give? The other piece is we have the funders round, we're going to call them funders roundtable, I believe. So, and I've been talking about this, about helping grantees pursue other funding opportunities to sustain their operations beyond Verdant. And so we have a concept paper for that coming to program committee as well for 2022 to bring other funders and connect other funders to our partners. So that's the piece, you know, we're moving from if you will, well, Verdant's always funded us, to how do we get to a place where Verdant is leveraging funding with other funders. And that's a big paradigm shift for us.
Totally.
Do we also have information for like in each of these, how many years we have funded them already?
That's a great suggestion.
I love that. And
Yeah.
I can add that in. I will, Jennifer, I may need to pick your brain on some of these, what I can find in the contract files, but I love that idea, Dina. So I can add a column of like total years of funding received or something.
Yeah, that would be helpful too, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Totally.
While you're throwing it in there, Zoe, why don't you put in the total funding then too for the life of the contract, all the contracts?
Ooh, even
So,
better.
5
Yeah.
years of 800 grand, you know, $4 million or something like that.
Which,
And it's going to be substantial for some of these. I need to be honest with you. I mean,
Sure.
we did the
Yeah.
math and it was 49 million that we've pushed out.
yeah, I mean, and I think this goes to the question that, you know, we hear often, which is, where does all the money go? Like, what are you guys doing with all of this? And if we if we redesign the website so that information is more transparent and easily accessible, this is one of them. Like, does anybody know that Verdant has funded the school district to the tune of multiple millions of dollars over the last few years? I would doubt. I think the answer is no.
No, they don't.
So that might be a good something
I
for
like
us
that.
as we fine tune this to put on, have as a resource on the website.
And I think Jennifer and I've talked about, and we've talked with Flux about having a direct kind of add-in of WordPress to our grant management software, being able to push some data too, that could kind of automatically update. The demographic report in Flux is like the most exciting thing I have ever seen in my life, because it is all reportable fields. So we will be able to pull for any kind of priority area, or what we could say, like, show us how many people who live in this zip code, or by gender, or by age, or by race, or by language. We'll be able to pull that up into dashboards that will automatically renew once somebody submits new data. And so I think, Karan, exactly that, of how is that kind of a seamless integration, so that people can see really real-time information about the impact of the levy dollars and just the work of Verdant at large.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, our goal
Well-
is that our community impact data will be very powerful and will be refreshed regularly, and that we will, after each funding cycle, be able to update with new data.
Yeah, cool.
Can I say, there's one other piece though. When people go to the website, they see a list like this. One of the things they don't know is what each of these groups actually, what this actually means. What does that program actually do? So it would be nice to have like even just like a mini little piece that says what some of these are, because, right, Housing Justice Project, what is that? What is that? Right?
Yep.
How does that actually impact the community? So at some level, they need, if we're gonna try and make this more so that people understand what it is we're funding, we also need to let them understand what these programs are.
Yeah, we can
And
hyperlink
Dina-
it to a bio, little summary
Yes.
page. Yeah.
And Dina, the Flux training that you saw, or our launch there, that organization summary and program summary, our
Yep.
idea is that we're going to pull that information exactly into the website. Jennifer and I were talking about how there may need to be some filtering, right? Because they're going to be entering that information in the lens of like wanting us to give them money. So trying to figure out, will there need to be any editing, or will it be able to just pull automatically to really do exactly that? Like, what is this? What does that mean?
Right. I mean, it would be really helpful. Just,
And yeah, and we're also planning for some profiles. And Jennifer, you might want to talk about that, partner profiles. If I think she's still with us.
I am a little dark over here, sorry, but yeah, absolutely. We have, I think, improved plans on being able to highlight some of the success stories that have come out of our grants. And so more regular rotation of those types of stories infused into all of our communication channels, but that's a piece that's coming through the website redesign, as well as putting more effort into highlighting the need in our community, right? And really making sure that those that the data, that the information that we're hearing about what needs exist in our community is also available to, to visitors to our site. So there's some understanding of here's the need and here's the solution that we're offering through these grant programs.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So before we adjourn this portion and go into the executive session, I want to make sure Lisa, the team has enough direction to finalize the budget if there's any outstanding questions.
I don't have any outstanding questions. I think it'll be interesting to hear what we hear from Howard and, and what that means. I do think I think we know, we get it, that if we continue at this current rate, we're not going to increase our reserves at any time time in the near future here. So
well, I do have a question. Has anybody heard, Swedish is still Swedish, right?
yeah,
Because when I got my stuff from the Swedish care clinic, they're coming from Providence. So I was kind of curious because that's a change.
No, nothing as far as I know.
Okay,
Nope.
okay, so it's just, because I was kind of like, have they gotten rid of Swedish even as something that they're talking about?
I don't know about it from a branding perspective. I know they've consolidated some of their admin and business services, which usually happens in mergers and acquisitions.
Right, but this is the, like a primary care clinic that
Um,
was called Swedish, but now the stuff's coming from Providence.
It'd be good to ask at Strategic Collab if the plan is to keep the Swedish brand or not. I guess that would be the question, right?
Yep.
Is there interest among the commissioners with Howard being available on the 27th? Is there any interest to start the meeting at 9?
That's fine with me.
It's fine with me.
Eh, Fine with me.
Fine with
I'm
me.
okay. Fine.
Okay, we'll move it to 9, which would be great because then we'll have internet back in the building. So thank you.
Well, maybe, fingers crossed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay, we'll make that adjustment tomorrow and make sure Howard and Brad are available and queued up. Okay, thank you.
All right, now we can go into executive session for a little bit. No action will be taken in executive session. The purpose of the executive session is to discuss qualifications for employment with the district.
Do we keep recording this? Do we keep recording executive session?
You shouldn't.
No,